Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trubergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. And this is a Storyteller's Corner examination. Pride, the Seed of Ruin, a Silmarillion Observation. Idioms and axioms are among the most useful shorthands for expressing concepts and frameworks swiftly in the English language, or any language for that matter, that manage to somehow historically remain relevant. Modern online discourse and commentarians might prefer to, quote, release the memes here, which is much the same thing in essence. The attempted conveyance of a truism that carries a tremendous amount of relevance and accuracy. One of the greatest of these axioms comes compliments of the wisdom of Proverbs 16:18, the modern proverb of which is, "Pride goeth before a fall." The implication is that the normal, historically repeating pattern we observe is that the moment someone gets too full of themselves, too cocksure or undeservedly confident that all is going to go exactly as they expect it to, because they are just so X, Y, or Z, that is the moment in which everything, deservedly, turns into a raging dumpster fire, fueled by homeless bum shit and dirty AIDS needles. That might seem a touch hyperbolic, but I like to add a little bit of flavor to these things. In J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion, the conceit of pride leading ever and always to troubles is one that shows up with the regularity of the sun rising in the morning. Moreover, it takes almost no time at all to make its first appearance, thanks to Morgoth of the Aenir being an almost one-to-one parallel to Lucifer Morningstar in Christian teachings. During the second of the three themes performed by Eru Ilúvatar and his first individuated creations, Morgoth being the proudest of these entities due to his being openly proclaimed the, quote, mightiest and most knowledgeable of them all, owing to a sort of jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none approach to his creation at Ilúvatar's hands, decides that he is going to try to dominate the shape and intentions of the theme, to bend all that his kin had put forth into creation, and maneuver it to be bent to his particular specific will. Of course, upon seeing what he's trying to pull here, Eru Ilúvatar, none too pleased or amused by this open defiance of his own designs, effectively snarls a cosmic "hold my beer," and proceeds to demonstrate through a bare twitch of his will what he is capable of in the whole arena of godhood, rebuking Morgoth for his folly. An indeterminate span of time later, after the 12 Aenir who descended into Ea became the Valar, but before they became known to the Quendi/Eldar/Elves, Morgoth endeavored to craft his own version of the Firstborn. Though the experiments of this nature were not gone over in great detail in the Silmarillion itself, it was implied that the best he was able to achieve was to take some handful of those earliest Eldar, roughly one-third of their peoples, once again, 3 coming into play, and he twisted and corrupted them into the creatures that would eventually become known as orcs. Once more, this seems a perfectly fitting parallel to Lucifer, if one were to ask me. After all, when the Morningstar rebelled against his creator, it is said that he took a full third of the heavenly host with him. A curious thing, that. Moreover, it did not escape me that he also turned approximately one-third of the Maiar to his purposes. And why did he do this? Because in his pride, he presumed that he would be able to single-handedly overcome the efforts and attentions of all of his other kin, even combined. Being the admittedly mightiest of them all, but possessing no other unique governance of knowledge or aspects in Ea, he did not foresee that his pride was undeserved. Could he have bested a portion of them if he were to somehow fragment them off of their collective unity? One could easily imagine that, yes, he could have. But this did not happen. The other Valar remained a united front, as did most of the Eldar, Nogrim, and the noble houses of men as pertained to pushing back against the machinations of Morgoth and his lieutenants. But Morgoth was not alone the sole figure throughout the tales of the Silmarillion who fell victim to the curse of pride, not by a long shot. Certainly, yes, he was the most potent and prominent one to do so, but numerous other figures in Tolkien's foundational work dashed themselves upon the rocks, known as hubris. Fëanor, he who of the Eldar alone mastered the craft of gemwork and mystic ability so intensely that he was able to make the titular Silmarils, was also a striking figure of intense pride. In the case of Fëanor, this aspect led him to ruin in almost an equal number of instances to the defeats of Morgoth. When Onjoliant, the Maiar spider bitch of endless craving, snuck up with Morgoth to the two trees of Valinor and drained their essences like a vampire once Morgoth stabbed them at their bases with a black spear, in my thinking, a kind of parallel to the Lance of Longinus. Anyone? Anyone? No? Okay, maybe another time. The light which had been shown upon the realms from those trees was snuffed out. In the aftermath, even after the wells of Varda, the source of water for the trees of Valinor, had been drunk dry by the same monstrous Maiar, the Valar queen Yavanna, she to whom the trees and animals were sacred and blessed, put forth that the trees could as yet still potentially be saved. The cost, however, would be the breaking open of the Silmarils, so that the light which those sacred gems had absorbed from the trees themselves could be returned to them to revivify them. And so the Valar lords and ladies asked Fëanor if this could be done, and at first the Noldor gave no answer. Before they could press him on the matter, Orlé, the Valar master of all smithing and gemcraft, as well as the creator of the dwarves, pointed out that they should give Fëanor a thorough chance to consider their request, given that even such as himself and his kin among the Valar might well never again be able to reproduce such miraculous creations as the Silmarils. This is a huge show of patience on the part of Orlé, particularly when one considers that the Silmarils are effectively the personified union of his and his wife Yavanna's domains of influence. Hers, the light came from the trees of Valinor, and his, the shaped gems themselves. Yet, in the long run, not only did Fëanor refuse the Valar's request, he went even further, and took this moment to invoke the Noldor Oath of the Silmarils, as well as having his 7 sons take up the oath as well. In his arrogant pride over his mastery in making the Silmarils, he led his people in open rebellion against the Valar, against all other elves, all dwarves, all men that had already and would yet come into the world, against all demons and monsters and even the smallest of animals, proclaiming that his people, and his people alone in all of creation, were worthy of uncontested dominion and possession of the Silmarils. The Valar, of course, don't take kindly to this display of ego. They effectively tell him to take his people, those who will join him in defiance of the Valar, and to leave their lands, to go east into exile. Like Morgoth before him, and like Lucifer in Judeo-Christian parallel, Fëanor ends up taking roughly a third of the Eldar, the Noldor, with him toward the east. Of course, there comes a bit of a hiccup in his designs when they get to the coast, since they have no ships of their own. When he speaks with Allway of the Teleri, Fëanor, once more showing his absolute arrogance and pride of station, Nion demands that the Teleri either build for him and his people ships of their own, or elsewise barter to the fleeing Noldor for some of the Teleri vessels. Like a petulant child, he insists that if the Teleri Lord Allway refuses him this, that it is the, quote, withholding of friendship. No, my good man, that's not friendship. That's a hostage situation. In the long run, Fëanor and his people end up employing force in Aqualonde, engaging in the first kinslaying in order to commandeer the vessels they require, and earning the wrath of the Valar in the form of being cursed by their own oath to ever suffer treason and betrayal and fear of betrayal, an invocation of paranoia. At the last, Fëanor's pride served him a 1-2 combination that ended in the loss of what should have been nigh everlasting life in Ea. Shortly upon his Noldor host's arrival in Middle-earth, they were set upon by orcs out of Angband, though they were able to handily repel the twisted creatures. However, enchanted and ensorcelled by his own victory, Fëanor decides that instead of taking the chance to regroup and strategize, perhaps confer with the other elves who've already been here for a while, Fëanor led his peoples in pursuit into the realms of Angband. Once they were too far in to safely disengage, the Balrogs, including Gothmog, lord of those creatures, joined the fray, and Fëanor was readily served mortal wounds. Though his peoples managed to escape the conflict with him, he soon succumbed to his wounds and passed out of the world thanks to his own foolish self-assurance. Others throughout the Silmarillion find themselves condemned by their own vain surrender to this impulse as well. In Chapter 22, On the Ruin of Doriath, King Thingol's pride in his station as a lord among the Eldar, the firstborn, sees him demanding that the master craftsmen of the dwarves not only set the singular recovered Silmaril into the Noglamer, but that they, as his lessers, surrender it back to him. Of course, their response was a bit fevered, since they rose up and collectively beat him literally to death. But even this reaction, birthed from a combination of those dwarven master craftsmen's raw, wounded pride and their lust for control of the Silmaril, that resulted in yet further tragedy. After fleeing Thingol's domain, those master craftsmen were ambushed near the border and slain, which perforce saw an army of dwarves from those masters' homelands march in savage and unrepentant vengeance into Doriath, bringing a brief, brutal war to Thingol's people, a war which the Nogrim won out. Thingol's disdain toward those dwarves, born of his pride, resulted in the downfall of a previously hidden dominion and a major fraction in the bond between firstborn and secondborn. Now, to be fair, even in biblical, scriptural examination, pride itself is not always and ever an evil, sinful thing, and there are several differentiations throughout the teachings of the Bible. Galatians 6:4, for instance, advises that after testing oneself, one should take pride in their accomplishments, but do so without comparison to another. There is a careful balance to be struck in the exercise of this sentiment, and it is all too easy to fall victim to the more boastful, destructive form of it, as highlighted before with Morgoth, Fëanor, Thingol, and the craftsmen of the dwarves. One of the finer portrayals of benevolent pride in Tolkien's work comes from the people of the House of Haleth, one of the clans of men. This curious case of a more scattered, less centralized host, denizens largely of woodland villages reliant on gardens, huntsmen, and forest gatherers, were viewed by Morgoth as easy pickings for his orcs, a kind of non-challenge to keep his foot soldiers fat and happy on savagery and loot. Yet, as sweeps of orcs were sent into the lands of the House of Haleth or Haladin, the men of that region pulled away in a fighting retreat, slowly whittling away at the orcs' forward numbers, whilst minimizing their own losses. Unfortunately for the humans, there was only so far that they could withdraw before they finally found themselves besieged at a previously established redoubt that they had prepared for just such an event. They had not counted on the orcs numbering quite so many, or being willing to draw out a lengthy enough siege to starve them out. Thankfully, Caranthir, an Eldar lord with lands and territory of his own just north of these men, had been watching these humans fight with honor and wit, outlasting what even Caranthir had assumed would be a best-case scenario timeline. As such, the Eldar led his own forces forth to join the tenacity of these humans against the orc invaders, crushing Morgoth's forces to the last. In the aftermath, Caranthir approached the surviving leaders of these men and offered them friendship and a domain within his own lands, that they might receive the protections and benefits of being his subjects. But the people of Haleth declined his offer, politely but firmly, insisting that yes, they only remained alive because of the Eldar's help, and they were much grateful for that. However, they expressed a firm belief that they would be better served tending to their own fate, their own patronage and capacities, which clearly were considerable. This is an example of pride that is not full of itself, for these members of the race of men did not claim to have had the situation all handled. They admitted that they had not, but that they could have, and they didn't say that they could have done without the elves' aid. Instead, it served as an example of wanting to strive for and accomplish for oneself and one's own kind, rather than being dependent upon another as a vassal. This is not pride as tinged by arrogance, but rather pride as tinged by honor. Recognizing this is why Caranthir promised to remain friends with this clan of men, for he saw in them the potential for greatness and integrity, deserving of that bond to his own people. Like any aspect of personality, be it embodied in a real, tangible person, or a fictitious construct composed for our entertainment and or edification, pride requires caution. For my own part, I am quite proud to have finally gotten around to my analytical read of Tolkien's The Silmarillion, though I am ashamed to admit that it took me far longer in life than it should have, given my love of fantasy. I'm also proud to present you these observation pieces, though I guarantee that there have been far smarter, sharper scholars to have put together essays and examinations on this monumental piece of fiction. I possess enough modesty to be certain of that much. More important than that, though, is this. I hope that by sharing these observations and thoughts, I might entice you, dear reader or listener, to consider giving the work a chance if you haven't before, or to give it a fresh look. Goodness knows, worthwhile books deserve as much love as they can get, and there are few works as lovely as those of J.R.R. Tolkien. Cheers.